Welcome today to a conversation about a debate that was organised by a London livery company called the Worshipful Company of Water Conservators. And it was prompted by UN Sustainability Goal number 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. And you might be wondering why a water livery company is talking about such a topic. Well, our Royal Charter says our field of work is water and the environment. And our mission is promoting a diverse and sustainable environment. And we've got a working group looking at sustainability, the environment, and resources and energy, and they facilitated this. And I started the proceedings by just making a few points. And one was that around the 18th century, three major events occurred. One was we discovered affordable sources of energy in the form of coal and oil. The other one was the Industrial Revolution. And the third one, our population has rocketed from 1 to 8 billion since then. And in the last 9,000 years, our cities have grown from something quite small to the mega cities we have today. And we now have more people living in the urban environment, the rural environment. So our cities have to be sustainable. But the question is, what does that mean? And how are we going to do it? And when are we going to do it? And we organised a debate. Cassie Sutherland, who works for the C40 programme, chaired it. She did very well. And Paul O'Hare talked from Manchester University. Michelle Ragalia is head of a sustainability in a property company. Dan Ling was with PwC as a partner, and Greg Lavery is the managing director of VIPE Office, and Dima Zozog is a director of Arup. And we're fortunate to have Dima and Greg with us today. So welcome, Dima and Greg.
Thanks, Alan.
The debate was under Chatham House rules, so we're not actually going to say who said what. But I thought we'd start the conversation with trying to address those three topics. Dima, would you like to start by saying what you think makes a sustainable city, what it is?
Thank you, Alan. And it's a big topic when we talk about sustainable cities. To me, it's really about discussing the future of life on Earth. The impacts of climate change are very visible. I showed, when we were at the event, an image that I took in the French Alps this summer, and another one in 2022, so really 3 years apart. And it shows an image of a glacier that has receded significantly over just 3 years. And we are feeling this in our cities. That heat, that climate change, we're seeing increased heat, we're seeing increased drought in our cities, and we're experiencing this in London, California, with wildfires, floods in Australia and in Spain. And projections suggest that actually London could feel like Barcelona by 2050. And we know that even our London plane trees may not survive in this future climate. And we know that sustainability is actually not a new concept. Since the 1970s, people have been asking whether our planet can sustain this continuous population growth. And therefore, at its core, sustainable development is about balance, meeting the needs of today's population without compromising the life support systems our future depends on. But also there has been an evolution of sustainable thinking, starting from green, which is reducing harm to the environment, through to sustainable, which is attaining this equilibrium between human needs and planetary health or planetary limits, towards restorative, which is about repairing the ecological damage that we have created. And more so today, we're talking about regenerative. So this is about, contributing positively, giving back, treating nature as a stakeholder and as a co-creator. And here's the challenge. We only have one planet, and we only have one planet worth of, finite resources, whether it's, water, land, we have really finite resources. And therefore, the main issue isn't about the number of people. It's about how we consume resources, how we build our cities. And this current pattern of urbanization and resources and use of these resources is highly intensive and frankly unsustainable. So when we say what is a sustainable city, I think a sustainable city is a city that deliberately designs places to work with and not against nature, enabling growth without sacrificing the planet's health. And the real challenge is an opportunity, I would say, is about building cities that regenerate, give back, and not just minimize damage. And therefore, nature should not be seen as a nice to have in our cities, but essential and must have. It should be seen as a core solution and an absolute necessity to create sustainable, resilient, and regenerative futures.
Good. Okay. I agree with you about climate change. I went to Antarctica in 2023 and I saw glaciers melting at an alarming rate, and our ship stopped one time. And 20 years ago, we would have been in a really big glacier, basically, to be in the same spot. So, yeah, there's been a horrendous amount of change. Have you got any examples of some of the good examples? Because one of the things from the podcast was, we really do need to build on the good example of sustainable cities.
Absolutely. And there are many examples of that. There are many examples what cities are doing. We're seeing cities like Madrid who are repurposing their transport infrastructure towards more sustainable modes of transport, towards the creation of new parks and open spaces. We are seeing new research coming out about succession planting in terms of in London thinking about the fact that the London plane trees may not survive in this projected climate that we're seeing. And therefore, Kew Gardens is developing research about what kind of trees we will be able to plant in our cities that are more likely to be trees more from the southern Mediterranean that will be able to survive in this future climate. We're also seeing places like Shanghai who are delivering, sustainable urban drainage master plans and sponge cities to help the city address surface water flooding. So there's a lot that is that cities are actually taking action on, both from the extra large, if you like, all the way through large, medium, small, and extra small, to even very small parklet interventions and ecological restorations.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast recently and they were talking about sunlight. And they mentioned the Green Heart Project in South Louisville, Kentucky, where right in the middle of sort of an urban city where, it was one of the poorer areas where people lived, they planted 8,000 trees and they measured their biological health indicators before and 3 years afterwards. And there was a 13 to 20% improvement in people's health because there's nature in the city, which is fantastic. I recall from the presentation, someone else's presentation, that they talked about the Green Roof Project in London, where there's trees on top of buildings. They talked about a square in London where they've actually retained and adapted the building as opposed to demolishing it, which is a great saving in carbon. And equally one Broadgate where they looked at the whole of carbon cycle when they were designing it, and the Eon project in the Royal Docks where they actually integrated all the building's energy together. And it's only when they sort of take, if there's waste energy in one place, they move it into another, and they only import energy when the overall balance is right, which is commendable. So yeah, and I think the other point was made, wasn't it, when I must confess it was me that raised it about cities are equally, they're about people, and it's not just work, because we live there, we live in cities. And I sort of asked the question, do you think that things that give us all, like music and theatre and museums and social community places, are they being built into the new cities, the refurbished cities, do you think?
I think to be able to make that leap towards regenerative, you will absolutely need to involve the community,
Yeah.
and you need to work in partnership with the community to feel part of it, to co-create it, to also deliver it, and possibly also maintain it. So community and people stand at the heart of this. And what we found out also from our work on the U-Heat tool, so it's a tool that measures urban heat in cities, is when we did it in London, for example, the people who are the most vulnerable to urban heat are people where there's a high level of deprivation. So areas that have open space deficiency and green space deficiency, areas that have non-adequate housing or poor quality housing, areas that have housing oriented into the wrong direction. So you're capturing the heat. And therefore, we have to design for people. We have to design our cities for our health and the health of the planet, but also the health of our people. And I always say that, imagine what if we built our buildings and infrastructure, with and for nature. And maybe I can talk a little bit later about how we get there. And I can give some examples, but specific example, this beautiful example of a building in Amsterdam called Habitat Royale, which is a proposal for a residential building in Amsterdam, which will be creating habitats for local species rather than destroying it, by optimizing facade design for bees, for birds, but also utilizing biomaterials that will be designed for disassembly and reuse. And we're seeing many of these innovations and solutions in our cities. And if I may add here, awards such as Earthshot Prize is a fantastic opportunity to surface these innovative solutions and scale them up to help repair the planet.
Yeah. And when I talk about sustainability, I mentioned we need circular ecologies, and particularly with regard to carbon, the natural world, water, atmosphere, population. But the other area is material resources as well, and that we do need a circular economy, a way of managing our home, which does it in a circular way, which leads me to say hi to Greg. And what do you think, Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think my perspective on what makes a sustainable city is having looked at this right back from my postgrad work back in the 90s, a lot of it is to do with health. And really, we need to take two perspectives of health. Health and well-being, right, which includes enjoyment in life and love and all those other things that most engineers don't spend much time talking about, but nevertheless are the foundation for our whole being as we move forward. So if you think if we split the health and well-being into two types, one, there's the health and well-being for nature, and then there's the health and well-being for humans. And of course, we have a bias towards anthropocentric, that is the human-centric view on things. But of course, we need to look after nature because nature feeds our own health, right? So unhappy nature end up with a very unhealthy bunch of humans, and no bigger challenge there than climate change. But previously, we've faced down a couple of other big challenges. I mean, many of us will recall the ozone layer and the chlorofluorocarbons, which was solved in a very technocratic way by saying those chlorofluorocarbons, we need to get replacements. Let's do that. Let's fix that. And of course, we're busy phasing out many bad chemicals, so volatile organic compounds and various other things that harm nature, but also harm humans. And so whilst there's a ton of work going on in that, the really big unresolved issue, and we're about to, as this podcast is being recorded, we're about to go off to COP30, which is a really difficult negotiation. How do you get the world's countries together to say, how can we reduce our carbon emissions? I suppose, peer into that a little bit more, we've got scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And for the audience Now, I can imagine this audience will know exactly what they are, but just in case they don't, scope 1 is the emissions that you create from your direct actions, like if you have a boiler that burns gas or you have a fireplace that burns timber. Scope 2 is using energy and other products derived from someone else directly boiling, so that's the electricity we use. And then scope 3 is all of the embodied emissions. So it's all of the carbon equivalents that have gone into making your table, your chair that you're sitting on, your sofa, and all those other things. And the world's doing a pretty good job at going after scope 1 and 2 emissions, but the real challenge is the scope 3, mostly because tracing those back to where their objects have come from is very difficult. And this is where the circular economy kicks in, right? And the equation for me is very simple in that climate change is a problem. Scope 3 emissions in terms of embodied carbon is a big problem. How do you solve scope 3? Well, really the only tool we have as a society, apart from reducing our population, reducing consumption, which is very difficult to do, is to actually improve the circularity of how we use things. And the circular economy has several different, it's called a sort of hierarchy. So in the first instance, don't use stuff you don't need. So don't buy stuff, which is not always an option if you're designing a building. The second option is minimize what you do use. So that's all about good design. The third option is reuse in its current format. So there's very minimal work to do on that. And then the next level is the sort of refurbish, remanufacture, and renew, which we can group around revive. And then, of course, you're into the less desirable cycles of energy from waste. And I won't even mention landfill and the other bad options out there, right? So what we're finding is that there is increasing interest in moving up to those higher levels that I spoke about first, of designing out, first of all, waste, but then actually designing things so they can be reused. Really simple example, if you're designing a building like many of our friends at Arups are doing, don't weld the steel, use bolts instead, because bolts are so much easier to separate to get the bits of steel back. And for goodness sake, keep a record of every bit of steel, which of course, if you're a designer, you know what the steel is in very intimate detail, but that can get lost along the way as the building might change hands over its 50 to 100-year life. So all of these things drive good practice. And then where we're seeing some really interesting developments, including in my own company, which I'm just amazed at how good our guys are doing things, is around the revive stage, that remanufacture. So what can you do specifically in our case around furniture, but there's all sorts of other good work being done in turning coffee grounds into all sorts of really cool products, from oil to building materials, turning other materials into other materials. There's a whole world of that going on right now, which is very poorly funded because not many people understand the space, and innovation systems aren't necessarily set up to fund that. And so which leads me then, Alan, to I think somewhere where you were going to go in this conversation. Well, what's being done about that, which is the DEFRA, the UK government department, has it and it's a bunch of other departments have pulled together a circular economy task force. So there is a bunch of 20 of us who are sitting on that, helping the government to navigate a way forward to create a circular economy strategy for the country, specifically England in the first instance, and presumably the devolved nations might also be interested in that. So how do you do that? Well, I mean, first of all, you've got to recognize there's some hard decisions to make and some difficult thorny problems to tackle. And one of those, of course, is the collaboration piece, because if the design of a building or a water bottle or a water filtration system, that can be done in a very sustainable way. But if that's then not followed through because someone doesn't build it properly and cuts some corners, or all the material at the end of the life of that gets thrown into landfill and isn't available then for reuse, there's a whole lot of steps around that circular value chain that need to align. So one of the real foci of that circular economy task force has been, how do you create incentives and policies to make sure that everyone around that cycle are actually doing the right thing to drive that circular economy? So it's a difficult question, but I suppose to circle back to your question then, the circular economy is a really important part of reducing carbon emissions. It also reduces material use, it also reduces waste, and it creates a whole lot more wealth for the nation and for those who don't have to buy materials at the original cost. But also it creates jobs in all sorts of locations. It's not geographically concentrated. That's the beauty of the circular economy. So there's a whole bunch of benefits in the circular economy and driving that forward, which is, of course, why the government is very interested in doing things, as are various other parties as well.
Okay, totally agree with you on the health bit. I'm becoming more aware of the impact of these forever chemicals, PFAS, and microplastics. And certainly in Antarctica, when I was there, some of the scientists were talking, and we're finding microplastics in all sorts of fish, the food chain, and we've now found PFAS and microplastics in our arteries and in our brains, and it's not a good place to have them. Another thing I'd talk about in my sustainability presentation is we really do need to think things through when we come up with a new product. Just like the ozone, leaded petrol, and the ozone and the leaded petrol were actually dreamed up by one man, so he caused most pollution. So yeah, it is an integrated challenge, isn't it? Really. So that's sort of where we need to get to. But how on earth are we going to get there? Dima, do you want to have a stab at that?
Yes, sure. It's a really big question how we will get there. Well, here's a starting point, I think, or one of the starting points. We know that more than 50% of urban land in cities is open space. So, parks, streets, rooftops, rail corridors, highways, wetlands, even brownfield sites. And therefore, if we want to make cities resilient and sustainable and even regenerative, these spaces have to play a role. And right now, about 25 to 30% of that land is for cars. So imagine replacing cars with, sustainable modes of transport, public transit, cycling, and converting the roads back to nature. Imagine roads as open spaces. How much nature we will have in our cities. And this is exactly what Madrid has done in Madrid Rio. Buried the roads, created parks, invited nature back into the city. But then there are buildings. This is the other big components. They account for more than 70% of emissions and also contribute to biodiversity loss elsewhere through the supply chain. In fact, this was a study that Arab done with WBCSD that found that 95% of the impact of a building on nature is off-site, is elsewhere, and only 5% is within the site boundaries. So what if we start designing buildings with and for nature? And for me, this is where we start talking about the responsibility of design and what's the responsibility of design is. Of course, it should achieve beauty, and this was always on the back of, designers, urban planners, architects, landscape architects, and also design thinkers. But today, it should respond to where the world is heading to. And there are many examples that design and beautiful design has shown irresponsibility and which led to where we are today. For example, the use of concrete and steel in buildings. Yes, it has created advancements in building design and beauty, but now we're locked into using steel and concrete. Manicured landscapes, the use of non-native species, non-adaptable plant species have led to biodiversity loss. So really responsible design is about being inclusive, about caring for the environment. But of course, we want to continue pushing for design, but what is the driver for it? And I don't have all the answers. But one of the answers is deploying responsible design with nature positive cities as a key goal or outcome. This could be one. So then you might ask me, so what do you mean, Dima, by nature positive cities? And I don't mean here greening. I mean the fact that to date, the urban built environment has majority negative impact on climate and nature. And it's time to reverse that, where the urban built environment is designed to have positive impact on nature and climate. And we know that the narrative on cities and climate is strong, but we just started realizing that nature is the third big component. And therefore, it's about designing nature into all our urban systems to meet the city's net zero ambitions, mitigation, but also with the 1.5 degrees target and reduce the impact of climate change, adaptation, and resilience. And therefore, it's about moving from the aesthetic to high performance functional landscapes and open spaces in our cities. And at all scales, as I mentioned before, from the extra large, from city strategies and plans, all the way to large and medium, like large parks and green corridors, all the way to small parklets and small pocket parks. And we know this has, there is evidence of the benefits that this will provide to various stakeholders, whether it's city dwellers, whether it's developers, whether it's authorities or businesses or landowners, in terms of cleaner air, cooler spaces, reduced flood risk, increased property value, increased biodiversity, even reducing heating and cooling costs and increasing property value. So I think that shift, that mindset shift, is really critical to enable us to get there.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree that we've got to start thinking in the long term, haven't we? And we need to start thinking about the future and design, but we need to start thinking about whole systems when we design things, not just its building, its entire life. But yeah, we do need to me, we need a master plan. We need good examples that we can show and to encourage other cities to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we should probably, I think one of the things in terms of like this complete mind shift is to get there in terms of when or how we will get there is, I wonder whether we can start asking ourselves, if nature was the client or if nature could speak, what would it be demanding of us? And in my mind, there's probably four things. Nature will say, do not harm me. Let me be. The second could be heal me. Restore me, heal me. The third could be prioritize me, increase me, make more of me, add me to your cities. And maybe the fourth could be let me help. Use me as a solution to address some of those challenges that you're facing in the cities. And therefore, this is about not using nature as an afterthought, but as a stakeholder and as a partner.
Well, very good point.
I think when we start asking these questions, probably we move from this incremental change to this transformative action.
Yeah. And I remember when I first joined Arup back in, a long time ago, we were working on the Dongtang project in China, which was one of the first sustainable cities to be dreamed up, which was a great project to be involved with. Greg, how do you see, we've had the circular economy on the agenda for ever since, as you say, the 70s. How do you see it actually progressing, kickstarting? How do we actually make it work?
Yeah, so I think the answer is a combination of carrots and sticks, right? If you look at what the French did, and I'll give a really simple example in a field that I'm heavily involved in, which is office furniture. The French government in 2021 passed a law that required every single level of French government, when they have a requirement for furniture, that 20% of that at least had to be second life.
Yeah.
And the Dutch have done something very similar. And I was in the Netherlands a little while ago, and whole factories have changed what they do. They're now trying to source second life stuff, which is creating all sorts of jobs and opportunities in the local area. Holy smokes, something as simple as setting not a particularly ambitious target, right? So we've got clients who've done 80, 90, 100% second life furniture, and the Chartered Institute of Waste Management, the host of this podcast, a couple of months ago, they moved up a floor in the same building, and we reused all of the same furniture. Their furniture bill was 100% reuse of furniture, albeit they didn't need quite as much because they were moving to a slightly smaller footprint. But we were able to take the unused stuff and find new homes for it as well. That level of circularity and circularity thinking is there. and it saves a whole lot of money as well. So I think the overarching drivers of what's going to create the change is, in my mind, twofold. One is we have this climate change issue that we need to deal with. Now, there are various people in the world who don't believe that that's an issue. Well, fine. We've got this second driver, which is you can save money and create jobs and help create 1.5 million homes. And the statistic that I've seen is for every 4 homes you build, you waste another home. Like literally, the building materials to make the 5th home are carted off in a skip. That's absolutely ludicrous, right? And very unambitious for us to live with that these days. So I think back to my answer is, what do you do? Well, the sticks are things like policies that says, I'm sorry, we're just not going to put up with bad behavior anymore. We're going to force it. And the interesting thing is, on the task force, we've been out there consulting with all sorts of different stakeholders, and companies and individuals who really care about this are saying, please regulate us. So the building industry specifically is a very diverse industry. You've got so many decision makers, and you've got leading companies like Waits and Mace and various others who are trying to create a better world every day, but they're dragged down by the what would you call it, the dodgy building companies who are trying to cut as many corners as they can in order to, and those corners are not just environmental or in materials, they're also in labor conditions and various other things. But what those big construction companies are saying, for goodness sake, please regulate us, because that means that we're all on a level playing field, and all the good work we've been doing for decades now becomes the norm, and that encourages us to go on to the next innovations that we want to put into the space. So I think that's one aspect. And of course, Arup's a good example. I mean, Arup is never satisfied with the design. The next design has to be better. And there's all sorts of examples of that. Just because that's, as humans, that's who Arup people are, but also as construction companies, the leaders are just trying to do better and better, which is better for the world, better for the environment, better for carbon emissions, and creating better spaces. So I think legislation is one aspect of that. I think there's also a bunch of carrots that you can put in place around sort of, okay, who's going to get the money? If there's a whole lot of money through the waste that's out there. I did a sum this morning, actually, said if and I'll come back to my favorite topic, office furniture. If 500 tons of office furniture every single working day goes to waste, and only 10% of that was available was good enough to be remanufactured, which, by the way, is not what the data is saying. It's closer to sort of 80 or 90%. Only 10%. That's £100 million a year of value that can be captured. That's extraordinary. And if you think back in our recent history, some of the extraordinary changes that have occurred. Let's take Airbnb, for example. Airbnb has revolutionized travel and tourism by essentially opening up spare rooms and vacant houses, which were a waste, right? So where was the source of waste? In the Airbnb world, it was around houses and rooms that weren't being used. And they figured out a way, using a fantastic digital information platform, to actually get that to customers and get the money flowing there, right? And people are making money out of that waste in an enormous way, including, of course, Airbnb itself, which is now a very wealthy company. Although they did take allegedly 400 times they had to pitch before an investor was prepared to put money in them. But that's the sort of, and for me, that's the sort of golden example of avoiding waste or the circular economy. Is no one understands it at the start that it's waste, that waste is actually value. But if you start to think with that different lens on, things become more valuable. And you say, well, why would we waste things if they cost us money to do that? And there's a more circular way that creates jobs and all those other social benefits along the way. So I think there's a whole bunch of carrots we can put in place, and there are some really interesting initiatives that I'm not at liberty to disclose, being done by some very interesting organisations that will pull through change just because they're doing interesting things. Earthshot Prize was mentioned earlier. I mean, that is starting to recognise the circular economy in even more ways. I think things as simple as inspiring visits to buildings and products that are incredibly circular. All of those things are really great carrots out there. And then the sticks are policy, legislation, rules, things like, and some of those are quite exciting, I might add. So the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard is an extraordinary collaboration of over 1,000 people across every building profession to put together a standard that was entirely voluntary and bottom up. There was no committee formed by the government to do it. It was just a bunch of individuals who volunteered to create this. And a couple of years later came up with an extraordinary piece of work that says if you're going to build a building, the footprint for that building, right down to and including the furniture, needs to be at the moment about 725 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per square meter. By 2050, that is 35.
Wow.
725 to 35. That's all aligned with net zero targets. That's an extraordinary change in what we do. And frankly, we won't be throwing stuff away. We are going to be reusing every scrap of the built environment that exists through urban mining and all those other things, which means not only do we need a big shed to put it all in, we need a really, really good information system to know everything that's in our urban environment, when it's going to become available, what it is, all of the strength parameters, and then be able to then access that when it becomes available and redesign that into other things. So I think it's a really exciting space right now. So I am very optimistic that the world is starting to change. And in fact, it has to. So it is a better, the circular economy is a better way of doing things. And in the world of paradigm shifts and Thomas Kuhn's structure of scientific revolutions, if there is a better solution out there, it will win the day. It's just a very slow adoption curve to get to full adoption.
Yeah. You mentioned money. Generation to change is going to cost an enormous amount of money. And we talked about some of the numbers, but, you potentially, well, even Bristol City have got a LEAP project where they've leveraged £1 billion to help decarbonisation. But one of the suggestions was, if you look at refurbishing homes, that, okay, if you're reasonably affluent, you're probably going to get on and do it anyway, aren't you? You've got the money, you're going to do it. And the government's probably got to help some of the lower social financial groups. But that sort of middle sector where it's the economics quite right because it costs so much. The suggestion is people are looking at actually grouping cities together to form big contracts so people can get the economies of scale, which I thought was a good idea.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of revolving funds, right? That's something I used to work in the energy sector a long while ago, and something that really hasn't been exploited, which given we've got a whole bunch of clever bankers around, especially in the UK, come on, guys, let's come up with some really good revolving funds idea. And let me describe how a revolving fund could work. So let's say you've got a home and your energy bill is £20,000 a year. Probably that's a bit too high. Sorry, let's say £10,000 a year energy bill. That's a lot of energy. And if the energy efficiency measures can save 20 to 30 to maybe even 40% of that, and the capital cost is, let's say, 5 years worth of that extra energy bill, well, you come up with an arrangement with the household, perhaps on a city level, perhaps on a regional level, to say, okay, we're going to charge, you pay us 5% less than you have been paying, than that 10,000 a year energy bill. We will then cover all the cost of all of those works up front. You'll pay us, we'll effectively get money back through the saving that we are capturing through the investment that we're making. And you can pay that off over 10 years. So you, the homeowner, will be paying 5 to 10% less per annum. And we will be paying that all back. And once we've got that money back, then we as a financing institution, which can be public, can be private, can be a combination, ideally, that then reinvest that money in the next street or suburb or county or whatever. And that way that money gets rolling and it keeps paying itself back. And the great thing about, and I'm glad you touched on homes, Alan, what a lot of people forget is that when you properly manage home energy use, and I'm talking about insulation, draft proofing, right through to sort of solar panels, LED lights, all those sorts of things, you actually get a much better place to live. And health, back to Dima's early point around health improves because you don't have any more mold, you don't have any more cold, which means the chances of catching pneumonia are a whole lot less. You've got better quality light. That means people can be more productive into the evenings. And the list goes on and on and on of all of those benefits. Of course, air quality is higher, therefore there's less pollution in the home from the suburb because it's not blowing through the drafty house. It just goes on and on and on. All of that is very good for health. Now, the dividend for a nationally supported revolving fund is that the cost for the NHS decreases over time, right? So it's that holistic thinking that's very difficult to do. And don't get me wrong, it's difficult because there's lots of participants. And the one theme I think that I put on the table at the event, which I'd like to reiterate now, is the importance of collaboration. All of these things come together because people say, hey, there's another benefit over here that we haven't even thought about. But when we fold that into the economics look even better and the case is even more compelling. And remember, we're not comparing with how the world was 20 years ago in terms of cost. We're comparing with what it will actually cost us if we don't make change happen. And the cost of cleaning up floods, the cost of insurance, all of those things are going up enormously. And the cost of inaction is now absolutely enormous. So things like these revolving funds are really a very small price compared with the cost of inaction.
Yeah. So our last question was, when's it going to happen by, guys? When do we think we can get here? Because I started in my introduction, I said, to me, we've got 75 years to get this planet sorted out.
Yeah, I mean, David, do you want to go first, right? You are taking the larger city perspective.
I think it's incremental. And I don't think we can say it's going to happen in 50 years, 75, in 100 years. It's about incremental change. If we look at the city as a puzzle, if we start with the small pieces of the puzzle, then we will complete the entire piece. We are not there yet, but we know that there are some really good schemes that are happening. There's some real things that are happening as well. But at the same time, we also recognize that there are some turbulences externally in terms of political situations, the economic situation that sometimes hinder this acceleration. Of course, this is not an excuse because we have to be resilient, we have to be sustainable, and we have to be regenerative. But I do not think, Alan, that we can put a time to it because I think it's an incremental change that will depend on multiple factors. But what I do know is that we have to make it evidence-based. We have to understand and quantify the benefits of all of these solutions and interventions we're talking about, because this is what will draw funding and financing in to help accelerate some of these solutions and scale them up.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, I think I've got a non-answer really, which is some things are going to be quick and some things are going to be incredibly slow, and it's very difficult to predict. I mean, from my time as a management consultant, there is this thing called the adoption curve, which most people will probably be familiar with. I think in many of these aspects of transformation of cities to be more sustainable, we're in the probably early adopter stage. Some of them in the early innovator, which is even before that. We're not really in the mass adoption. However, the good thing about the experience curve is you get there eventually, the adoption curve. So you get there eventually. And the question is, when is eventually? Now, the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have set 2050 as a notional target. But we're seeing now, a report came out today suggesting that we are on track for a 2.8 degree world. Well before we get there, there are parts of part of our infrastructure that are going to be absolutely hammered, leading to all sorts of change happening in a hurry. Things like coastal villages being wiped off, like Jamaican islands being razed. I mean, we've had that pretty much recently. Things like that are going to raise awareness, and humans can mobilize incredibly quickly. We gave the example of the chlorofluorocarbons and the ozone layer as an example. On the other hand, things can take a long while. I'm not a big fan of the COP process. That seems to be a pretty ineffective way to get change to happen. But on the other hand, there are other mechanisms. And what gives me great comfort is that mostly doing better will also save money in some form or another. I mentioned health benefits also. I mean, so for instance, if you want to if you want to have a new office, I can save you 20% straight up front. If you want to do it, if you want to improve your energy efficiency, our rule of thumb when I ran an energy efficiency company is we'll save you 20% and there'll be a 3-year payback on that. So the economics are really there. It's just the will to do things. And my one takeaway from the event the other day, which I still reiterate because I believe it's really important, is it's not up to waiting for someone else to do something. It's up to you as an individual. If you're listening to this right now, how are you going to make a change to make the world better tomorrow? It's not this is not up to someone else. It's up to you because everyone makes decisions in everything they purchase as a consumer. Many of us have jobs in positions where we can influence the procurement of that and the design decisions that go into our future. So if everyone makes a concerted effort to personally make change in their sphere of influences, then the world can change remarkably quickly. However, there are many people who make excuses or think it's someone else's problem. Frankly, it isn't, right? I mean, I've met many people, including myself, who made a decision a long while ago that I don't have enough charisma to raise a political movement for change. However, what I can do is everything I do try and be as sustainable as possible. And that means that I go to sleep at night knowing that I've done the best I can, including setting up a company to drive the circular economy, including helping the government to think about its circular economy strategy. I mean, that in itself is very fulfilling. And it leads me not to worry about the world having a bad future because I know every day I know I'm doing my utmost to make that better future happen. And I think that whole fulfillment, if I circle right back to where we started, what does a sustainable city mean? Well, it's about fulfillment, wellness, and all those other things. And part of that fulfillment is knowing that we're moving the world to a better place.
Yeah, agreed. Dima, have you got one takeaway from the debate?
I mean, I wouldn't have put it like better than what Greg has just said. I truly believe that it is a mindset shift. It's on all of us as individuals to take action. Maybe we have to consume less. We probably have to build less, retrofit more. And I think it's not about, a moment in time. It's about this continuous transformation.
Yeah.
And we need to see this as a journey towards this end goal of being sustainable.
Yeah. Good. I wrote this, Greg, I wrote this down as my final statement I was going to make to people, but I'm going to read it now. It basically says, becoming sustainable starts with you.
There you go.
My farewell message.
Indeed.
So, and just to close things down, thank you two for your debate. It's been quite wonderful. And the next Water Conservators City Environment Debate is next October. And our current view is our title is going to be Treasuring Our Home, (Planet Earth). Are we doomed? Is there hope? Which is worth talking about. So, Dina, Greg, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
If people want to attend the next conference, my address will be in the notes, as equally the full report of our debate will be there as well. So